This is coffee number 5. I'm your host, Lara Schmoisman. Hello there. Welcome back to coffee number 5. Today, I'm thinking about beauty. And when I think about beauty, I think about all those magazines that I was consuming since I was a little girl, and that I wanted to have all that makeup and try all that makeup and that glitter. And I have to say that at some point I did go overboard of the amount of makeup I put on myself. It took like many years to understand what was a makeup for me, which is very minimal today, and what it will work for me just to maintain every day, because doing makeup to yourself, it's a lot of work. And let me tell you another secret, that when you're aging, you need a little more makeup to keep it up. But anyway, later in time, I was getting into the beauty industry from the other side, from the marketing side. And I realized that there were not only those beautiful glittery magazines, also there were trade magazines, that they were for people in the industry who really knew what they were doing, and they were making predictions, and actually the brands were listening to them. So today I want to invite, and I'm so happy she said yes, Kelly Kovack. And she is the editor-in-chief of BeautyMatter. And welcome, Kelly.
Thank you.
I have to ask, how did your BeautyMatter started? Because doing a trade magazine is something like a really high level. You really need to know your stuff.
Well, honestly, it was a little bit of an accident. Well, I don't know that it was an accident. It was an idea that I had. I spent the majority of my career on the brand side, and specifically in the independent brand arena. So my first job in beauty was at Bliss many moons ago. I started the catalog division with Marcia. And so that was
I want to hold my head when you say catalog, because
I know
catalogs weren't the same thing like today. You input in the computer. It was a lot of work.
It was a lot of work. And it was, it's a little strange to say it, but it was incredibly disruptive at that time, because it was sort of pre-e-com. Mm-hmm. And we developed an entirely new distribution channel, because at that point I came from the fashion industry. So I didn't know any better.
I love this, because my background also is in fashion. And I've been talking lately with so many people that they have fashion background and they get into beauty industry by accident. Yeah. And it has so much to do one of the other. There's so many connections.
Yeah, but at that time, beauty was sold in brick and mortar retail, and that was sort of it. And Marcia had this. She was part of a cult product roundup in Vogue that had 3 products: creme de la mer, Karen Herzog Vitacombi, and some bone marrow cream. And we always used to say, like, that Vogue placement was the placement that built Bliss. And so she knew the power of print and had this idea of doing a beauty catalog. None of us knew how to do it, but we just, we were in our 20s, so you just go off and do it. So that was in 1996. We got told no a lot. And then in 1999, the spa and the catalog and we had launched the product brand as well, were acquired by LVMH. So that was how I got into beauty, which was also sort of an accident. And then I've had various incarnations of service businesses. So kind of concept to counter shops, strategy shops. I had one agency that turned into a design agency, which is a horrible business model for 2 people who are not graphic designers. But we won lots of fancy awards, and started a couple brands of my own along the way. kind of self-funded them into oblivion. But they were big, looked bigger than they were at the time. And also sort of during that period, was the first vice president or part of the first leadership team really for Dr. Dennis Gross Skincare. So that was about 18 years ago when sort of doctor brands were just emerging.
Yep.
But the majority of my career has been sort of starting brands, advising brands, kind of startups and cleanups, what I like to say, and starting and working with entrepreneurs, investors, and then some very large apparel companies like the Gap Inc. company to kind of integrate beauty into their assortment. So definitely not a very linear career, but at some point I started building brands differently, and I started thinking about brands as publishing platforms. People looked at me like I had 10 heads when I was talking about it, which fast forward now, it's like every brand needs to think.
Believe me, there are a lot of people who still look at me kind of crazy when I talk to them and say, we need to think omnichannel. You can just not think D2C, or you cannot think just retail. You need to be everywhere.
Yeah. And, at some point I don't come from big beauty. So I also didn't come from big budget. So I never had the luxury of throwing money at a problem. I always had to be scrappy at how we were launching brands and really making a statement. For me, very often was taking risks creatively, either through the language, or using design. And, during that time, people started asking me to write. And so I couldn't say no because I needed to market the business, but it was really painful. It would take me days to write 500 words. But something resonated. And so I kept doing it. And people asked me where I got my ideas from. And it was never from the beauty trades. This was about 15 years ago. So the beauty trade landscape has changed dramatically. But 15 years ago, it was really just women's wear.
Yep.
And sort of the trades that were very sort of specific to usually a category. And they really sort of focused on kind of deeper in the supply chain. And when I saw Business of Fashion launch, when Emron launched that, which was about 15 years ago, it's like, why does nothing like this exist in beauty? Like, it's so brilliant, so fresh. And I couldn't get it out of my head. Like, I'm not a tech person. It's not like I was going to throw up a website and figure it out. And it really, I would say for about 6 years, it just rattled around in my head. But I had no way of validating the business. It was just a gut instinct that I think there's a business to build here. Not sure what it is. And I found 2 people came to me from an agency that kind of wanted out of the big agency world. I needed their sort of digital expertise, but I hired them with the caveat of helping me build BeautyMatter.
I totally understand where you're coming from. I wanted out of the big agencies too. And that's why I created my agency.
And, so we kind of had a plan A and a plan B. Plan A was, I think there's a business to build here. We'll figure it out. Plan B is no one cares, and we'll use it for marketing. So we set out and built it. We launched it. We were, I think pre-BeautyMatter, I was really a little obsessed with perfection. And John Caffarelli, who's now our COO, is a good friend. And we were having breakfast. He's like, when are you launching this thing? And I told him, it's not quite right. And I remember so clearly, he told me, he's like, you have to launch with an ugly baby, Kelly. It's tech, like it evolves. Was the best advice. And, I was like, yeah, but we've met. I don't really do ugly babies, right? I'm not 24 years old. I can't, if I'm going to do this, it has to be done right. But I listened to him, And 4 weeks later, we kind of pulled the plug and BeautyMatter went into the world. We sent our first newsletter and my inbox was inundated. So, I realized that, yeah, I think I'm onto something, still not sure what it is. And I didn't really have a plan. So for about 3 years, just did it on the side. I was lucky enough to have enough business with consulting that there was a little extra money every month to keep this running, and we figured out whether people were just being nice to us or if there was something really there, and what that was, and why.
Definitely there was something there.
Yeah, and why people were making the comparisons they were. And I knew at some point I would focus on it and build a business around it. I didn't really have a plan for when that was, but it was about 6 months pre-pandemic that John Caffarelli came on board as the COO and helped me sort of build a strategy around, like, how do we turn this semblance of a community that's super sticky into a business. And so I really feel like, there was kind of the pre-BeautyMatter and then BeautyMatter as it is today, which is sort of a proper business. But that's how it happened. It was an idea that actually turned into a business.
Well, I have to say, I've been in too many beauty events, and this year you have the BeautyMatter event as well, which I really, really enjoyed. It was really well done, and it was intimate. And also, it was really industry. I feel like the people that they were invited to be part of it, they really felt very comfortable talking to anyone. And I remember that you said at the beginning, the only thing that we ask you today is to talk to someone you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked. And also, I met amazing people there that I keep connecting, and with the promise that we're going to have coffee soon, and we're always busy or in different cities. But anyway, and I was able to get a lot of guests in the podcast, including you. But I have to say, it was really, I feel like a lot of events, beauty events today, and I don't know if you noticed this, there is a huge gap. You have the investor side that they will never invest in those tiny little brands. And I met all these people that come in that they said, I have a brand idea. They don't even have a product. They don't have a prototype. So it's like those two extremes, they don't match. So there is a huge gap in the middle.
There is, but, little brands and ideas turn into big brands, not all of them. But, for us, our community is, when we launched BeautyMatter, it was really to represent the entire ecosystem. So brands and retailers, the investment community, and then the entire supply side. So anyone that's providing a good or service to a brand or retailer is sort of that spoke of our community. I have a new healthy respect for events.
They're a lot of work.
Wow. I had no idea. I mean, in the middle of it, at some point, I was like, my God, like, what have we gotten ourselves into?
But it became the talk of the year in the beauty industry. I have to say that.
Well, we really didn't want to just show up with another event because, right now there are a lot of great people on the B2B side publishing content. I think everyone kind of has their niche. And there's a lot of great content being created. And there are a lot of events happening as well. So we decided if we were going to show up with an event, it needed to be distinctly ours. But we've also been going to events for decades. And so we literally deconstructed the event experience. And we're like, okay, where are all the pain points and how can we solve them? So not waiting in line, even though I had to fight tooth and nail with our event planner who said I didn't need 2 bars. I was like, but I want 2 bars. I don't want people waiting in line.
Oh my God. Having your coffee machine was a dream. I became best friend with the lady. She knew what I wanted already. Every time I show up.
People, it's like people are, for us, it's like we don't take it for granted. Like, people can spend their time and money with lots of people. So if they're going to choose to spend the day with us, we wanted it to be meaningful. So, all of our content is, you cannot buy your way onto a panel. The content at the end of the day is what drives the entire event for us. Little things like food. Why does food have to be bad at conferences? It doesn't.
Right. But also the fact that it was one day, it was compressed. And I have to say, I had a really rough time choosing room A and room B sometimes, because I wanted to be everywhere. But then one day is doable. Sometimes when events are many days, for me, it's hard to take those days off work.
Yeah, we're going to do 3 events in 2023. So we have a partnership with the British Beauty Council. So our first event, we did one at the end of the year in London. So we're doing another event in February. And then we'll have an event in April in New York. And then we'll do the event in LA in October this year. But you mentioned that at a lot of these events, there's very tiny brands and investors, and sort of the check size doesn't match the money, so to speak. I think that, our event in New York is really focused on kind of closing that gap a little bit. And I think that we've spent a lot of time talking to investors, asking them, what do you want out of an event? And for everyone, it was sort of meaningful opportunities to network. So this year, we're going to add a level of technology to our events. Well, it's not going to be anything crazy. It just gives visibility to who's in the room, because it's very hard to network if you don't know who's in the room. So it'll give visibility to who's in the room, and at a bare minimum, and the opportunity to get in touch with them via messaging of some sort. So we've really sort of, we're doubling down on our idea of keeping these small and intimate, having surprises in terms of activation, focusing on feeding people good food. And so that it's also not only it's a time for people to sort of have fun and learn, expand their ideas outside the beauty industry. And, we'll do it in cities where the bulk of our community is based at this point.
Well, what I really like about your event is that everyone was in the industry. I didn't feel like anyone that it was there. I can go and talk shop. And everybody was using the same names and terminologies. And so everyone felt comfortable of even saying, oh yeah, take my cell phone number and call me, whatever, because they knew that because the people that were there were brought by you guys. So they were somehow clear. So they were really industry. And
one of the things we did, we also set up a grant program. And Lubrizol helped us fund that, because listen, we've all been there when you're in a startup. Like, listen, budgets are limited for anyone, but when you're self-funding something, spending $1,000 on a ticket to go to a conference isn't an option. And those events are incredibly expensive to put on. So we invited, Lubrizol brought 8 people there. We gifted another 15 tickets because we felt that it was important that, like, how can you talk about the future of beauty if the potential future of beauty can't attend the event because of financial reasons? So,
no, I think scholarships are great and to provide that. But also, I believe that there are some brands that quite yet cannot benefit. Because they're not ready. And the only thing that you're going to do is, if you go to those places, you get those connections, you're going to get burned in many regards.
It's true. But I think, listen, I remember when I was doing the Bliss catalog, I had no idea what I was doing. None of us did. And I used to go to direct mail events. And people would look at me like I was absolutely from another planet, because they're like, well, you don't have product on the page, or you don't have product on the cover. How can you're not going to sell anything. You're not even thinking about like products per square inch. And, so we were doing something totally different.
Yeah.
So I've been that person. And I think, I think if you're not exposed to the information, you can't gain the information.
Absolutely. But I feel like there are stages. And like, for example, you get into your beauty industry, you need, first of all, to understand not just the wish of having a product, what entitles to have a product. What are the steps that you need to have a product? You cannot go and ask for finance or talk to investors. And sometimes it's great to have those contacts, but you can burn relationships to jump ship too fast.
No, that you're absolutely right. I think, unfortunately, I think there's a narrative that's been happening in the beauty industry, that, listen, the bar to entry for launching a beauty brand has never been lower. It's very easy to throw up a website, to wrap some labels on a product, and you're in business. Mm-hmm. But I mean, in my 25 years, it's also never been more expensive to launch.
Well, yes, because right now we have all the issues with shipping, manufacturing. There are a lot of issues.
Yeah, not only that, just competing, period. Like the couple brands I launched in Barney's. We were self-funded. It was possible to launch a self-funded brand. Today, to compete at Ulta or Sephora or a Target or Walmart, I mean, you're talking about a lot of money to really succeed. But that being said, I think that there's often the brands there are also brands that are successful in a different way, right? Raising a ton of money at some insane valuation has become some metric of success. But there's a complete other success listen, if you can launch a beauty brand and off of that revenue, you can pay your mortgage and send your kids to college, that's success too.
Oh my God, I will be dancing.
Yeah.
And
there are a lot of people who, maybe they have a brand that does $1 million and they can live off of that, and they have a nice living. That is success.
As long as your product cost, distribution, marketing doesn't cost you more than that, you're fine.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, there's lots of ways to distribute products. So, I mean, listen, I think there has been this formula, which is launch a brand, raise money, choose your retailer of choice, scale, raise more money, and hope for a strategic exit. But that's not the only path to launching a brand.
And also the industry is changing a little bit in that regard, because when there are a lot of big brands now that they can absorb your product, but then your product can disappear too, because they absorb it under your brand. So there are risks that you will be taking and whatever path you need to go. But I have 2 questions for you, actually. What's going on with influencer actors and everyone having their beauty line?
Listen, I mean, I know there are a lot of people who feel like there's not a place in the beauty industry for them. Those people should invest in their brands rather than launching their own brands. I'm of the mindset of, listen, I don't care if you're an influencer or a celebrity, you have sort of a leg up in some respect. You probably have easier access to capital. You have ostensibly a community that you can leverage. But beyond that, it's still really hard to build a business.
Totally. And also, it needs to be quality products, because you might be selling once, and if it's not quality and it doesn't resolve an issue for someone or a problem, that they're not going to buy it again.
Yeah, I mean, I think the having quality products is sort of, if you don't have that, you don't have a business. But I also think that you also have to build a brand. And so, listen, I think anyone who wants to, throw their hat in the ring, we're supposed to be inclusive. So why not? Right. But I do think that there is going to be there's going to be sort of this culling that happens. It happened during the last recession. There are a lot of brands that have no reason to exist. There was a lot of free money around. It was pretty easy. And now, it's more difficult. And so I think creators are, they're not going anywhere. I mean, my 8-year-old niece has these 2 favorite influencers, and all she wanted for Christmas was their merch. So that tells you something. Like, they're here to stay.
Absolutely. And also, let's think about traditional brands like Chanel. Chanel always had one person who was the face of Chanel that we identify the brand. And so we've been using influencers to sell products for years. Now having someone who creates their own brand, good for them. It's business. It's a business decision, and using their own persona. Again, to me, it's about the quality of the product. I don't have a problem with that as long as we're not, they sell products that they're actually helping other people.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it goes beyond the product. So, I've been approached by a lot of people who they're like, do you want to get involved in this brand? It's X and X celebrity. And my first question is, are they funding it? And they're like, no, we have to give them $1 million. I'm like, I'm out.
Well, I wasn't even going there. I don't want to be even part of that side of the business. If I will do something, I will invest in my own thing. But to me, if an influencer, a celebrity, whoever you want to call it, they create a line to resolve a problem. A beauty line, to me, need to be addressing issues, a problem, a solution to someone, and not just a pretty label. As much as I love marketing, and I think it's so important to look great.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, there are some celebrity brands that are incredibly compelling. There have been celebrity brands are not new. Sure, were sort of faces of brands, but there are also celebrities that have built brands and have been quite successful. So, I think it was a bit of a trend. A little bit like we saw all these indie brands launch because it seemed like just show up and, a strategist is going to, build it and they will come with $1 billion check, but that is not the reality. Yeah. So I think we're going to, on the celebrity side, I think we're going to see a lot of them shut down very quickly. And the ones that have built real brands with great product offerings, they'll be here for the long haul.
Well, also there was a trend, you mentioned it, like 18 years ago when you were working with a doctor, was one of the first brands, doctor brands. But then at some point there was a trend of doctors white labeling and creating based on white label, putting just a sticker with their name.
Yeah, that's always been around.
Yeah.
That's always been around. And it's, it's kind of deep in that professional doctor channel. And there are manufacturers that support that business. By the way, some of those products are very good. It's white labeled. So, there's different ways to get into the business, but selling product and building a brand are kind of fundamentally different things.
Absolutely. Okay. Predictions for 2023.
It's a hard one this year. I think that, I think 2023 is going to be a tough year. Kind of going into, this year, there's been a lot of talk about, the beauty industry, how resilient the beauty industry is, and it's recession proof. It's definitely not recession proof. It is definitely more resilient than a lot of categories. But I don't think we've really felt the impact of it yet because we're kind of off the high of the holiday season. But when you have people saying that, they're having a hard time, paying their grocery bills and their heating bills and gas, it's a trickle down. It's going to impact beauty in some way. And I think also the access to capital's gotten expensive. So there's a lot more due diligence that's happening. The valuations have come down. So for brands that the brands that don't have a runway or haven't raised enough money to get them through the next 18 months, I think it's going to be all about kind of getting through, maintaining growth in kind of a realistic way. Some of the categories that I'm excited about, I'm really excited about what's happening in the clean beauty space, only in that, like, we've created a mess for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole clean beauty concept is something that the beauty industry created. We then sort of, in our effort to differentiate ourselves, started creating kind of these different variations of beauty, of clean beauty, or different definitions of clean beauty. And then the retailer stepped in to try and add a level of, structure to it. Obviously it was opportunistic as well, because it was a way for people to shop. So now you have, every retailer that has a standard is a different clean standard. We saw our first big lawsuit happen around clean claims. Before we went into holiday, Congress pushed through some regulation, first regulation since 1938, in beauty, which it doesn't really change anything. Most big beauty brands are already doing this.
Mm-hmm.
But the FCC is also updating their standards around eco-marketing. So there's a little bit of regulation happening, but we've also seen consumer pushback. So it is this monster of a category that has been created with very little substantiation, and no sort of homogenized understanding of what it is. I think there's going to be a big shakeup. Deciem came out with an anti-clean product having sulfates.
There's a whole new category that this year, I feel like finally really hit into the beauty market, which is sexual wellness.
Yeah, sexual wellness for sure. But I worked with a brand, my God, it was a long time ago, called Jimmy Jane. That was a sexual wellness brand. They were way too early. But I think sexual wellness is an interesting category, because retailers have started adopting it.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, I think the brands that are going to win are going to be the ones that look and act like personal care brands at the end of the day. Because all of these brands have raised money, so there has to be a path to an exit. And there really hasn't been a big one yet. So I think.
How do you feel about sexual wellness being kind of a category inside the beauty industry that now even Sephora carries some?
I think it has been a long time coming. I think if we have other wellness categories, and we're servicing sort of wellness, or even, there are brands even talking about mental wellness now. In food, drug, and mass, sexual wellness has always been part of sort of the extended beauty assortment.
But it was the part that nobody talks about.
Yeah, the one that no one talks about. So I would argue that it has been I'm shocked it's taken this long. But I think it absolutely belongs sort of in the beauty assortment.
Yeah, I have to tell you a story. My first client with the agency was with sexual wellness.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, it was tough because there's so many things that you cannot do. You just need to find ways around it. It's not impossible, but recently opened up so much, and it was like, oh my God, now it's so easy.
Well, yeah, when I was working with Jimmy Jane, like the beauty magazines would not say vibrator. They wouldn't photograph a vibrator. All they would photograph was their massage candle. So, they were trying to come up with clever names. And I'm like, no, it is what it is.
Exactly.
So we've come a really long way in the category, just kind of normalizing the conversation. And I think you could say that around a lot of around a lot of sort of female wellness categories, period care, menopause, fertility. All of those are at the end of the day sort of female health and wellness categories that had sort of stigma attached to them.
Hey, one last question before we go. If you will have to define each one of the generations, let's start with baby boomers, with X Gen, et cetera, going to alpha, what beauty product they care about? How can we reach to them?
I know that's how we usually talk about consumers. I think sort of talking about consumers in generations is a little antiquated, because I think there are people have different lifestyles. I live in New York City. My lifestyle is very different than my cousin that lives an hour and a half away. So I find it hard to sort of pigeonhole people by generations. But what I will say is that I think the Gen X consumer is overlooked right now. Maybe it's because that is my generation.
Yes.
But Gen X consumers are not boomers. And I think that the beauty industry is missing a huge opportunity, because you mentioned as you get older, you have to wear a little bit more makeup, yes. Skin changes. And, right now everyone is talking to Gen X through this lens of menopause. And I'm like, yes, complete with menopause, but moving on, right?
Exactly. And menopause right now, thanks to a lot of science out there and products, you can get through it.
Yeah. Yes. So I think that there's a huge opportunity for kind of speaking to if brands unlock Gen X and how this Gen X consumer is approaching getting older, then I think it will flow, because millennials are right behind them. So I do think that there is an opportunity, where everyone is focused around not saying anti-aging and whatever, that's marketing semantics. At the end of the day, we get old, we get to choose how we want to go through that aging process. So I think there are brands that need to show up to this Gen X consumer sort of in the way they lead their life. And I know there are a lot of people talking about it, but no one's really sort of cracked it yet. I think millennials, it's interesting. I mean, if you use Glossier, which was the quintessential millennial brand, it hasn't really aged with the consumer. Millennials are getting married, having kids, like their lives have changed. I think there's a lot of similarities, oddly enough, between millennials, sort of the older end of that cohort, and Gen X. I think Gen Z is a fascinating kind of demographic cohort, because they are truly the first digitally native cohort. They're incredibly, like, the way they process information it's
completely different. My kids are they're Gen Z, and anything I tell them, they wouldn't go look it up. Yeah. Even ingredients. Before, for me, an ingredient was something that before I got into the beauty industry, the doctor will tell me, you said, or you try these ingredients, that this will be good. Okay, I wouldn't question.
Yeah. No, they're incredibly inquisitive. And I think the funny thing, though, is they're always just looking for the answer rather than sort of trying to arrive at the answer themselves. So sort of how they process information is very different. But I think their commitment to brands that stand for something and values, like, that's not going to go away. I think that's sort of here to stay in a very profound way. But yeah, it is an interesting generation. And Generation Alpha, I mean, there's a lot of conversation around the metaverse. Like Generation Alpha is already in the metaverse. They socialize in the metaverse through gaming. So, I
But
think
it's very different how they interact. It's very different how they have relationship with people.
Yeah. But I honestly think that brands that have the ability to build cross-generational teams are the ones that are going to win because of this. I just don't think these sort of, dividing consumers through sort of age groups. We just don't live that way anymore.
I agree with you 100% with you. Is for me, targeting is not only about the generation that you belong, it's about your lifestyle or your geolocation. There are so many factors, and it's all schools just to be targeting people in by generation, because we're really different. Even I have to say, like, for example, I grew up in Argentina in the 80s that we weren't able to listen music in English. So for me, the music that was 80s in the States was 90s for me.
Yeah.
So I am not part of that generation, but by age I am.
Yeah.
So
no, it's
very different.
At the end of the day, consumers are not numbers. There's people behind. We've become so obsessed with capturing data and analyzing data. But at the end of the day, there's people behind those numbers. And people often ask about, predictions. And when I look at these trend predictions that are solely based on data, they feel off to me, because I'm like, why don't you go spend a couple hours on a sales floor if you really want to know what's trending, or go speak to a beauty advisor? Because at the end of the day, we're in an industry that is based on people. So you have to have those conversations.
And like you said before, is a lot of time about your gut feeling. And gut feeling is that experience that you had over so many years doing things. Like sometimes I tell my team, this will happen. And it happened, because been there, done that. I know that it will happen. And there is no data to tell me that it will happen, but there are things
Yeah, and that is where sort of, when people are so obsessed with data now, and I'm like, but how do you have that runaway success? Because we're all looking at the same data. So,
and also we're looking at the data, but also you need to know how to learn the data.
Yeah. So I always use the data as a gut check. Like if I can find enough data points, they may be deep, kind of in what's trending. I use data more as a gut check. I mean, for our business, obviously we use data differently, but from a trend perspective, I think that there are so many brilliant trend forecasters, and I feel like they've been pushed aside at the moment. And been replaced by like Google Analytics. And there is that intangible quality of a human being connecting information in a way that makes a prediction of some sort.
And that's something that I talk to my clients all the time, because anyone can have Google Analytics. It's easy to get it. It's easy to read it, but it's not easy to understand, and to understand what created each one of those factors and what happened. Without that knowledge, reading the analytics is the same as nothing.
Yeah. But I think it's going to be an interesting 2023. I'm excited.
Oh, I'm excited too. Well, we'll see. We'll check again in a few months and we'll see where we're standing.
Sounds good.
Okay, Kelly, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Really enjoy. I mean, everyone knows that this podcast went much longer than usual, but I didn't even realize. I love talking to you.
I'm sorry.
Don't be. Okay, and to you guys, I will see you next week with more Coffee Number 5. See you soon.
Bye.
It was so good to have you here today. See you next time. Catch you on the flip side. Ciao, ciao.